special Halloween review, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis by A.T. Gonzalez.
Being alone in a room all by yourself, everything's quiet, and then all of a sudden a giant monster with a rocket launcher comes and attacks you with tentacles? Never before or after Resident Evil 3 have I seen something like this in a video game. Resident Evil 3 marked the end for the PlayStation trilogy of Resident Evil games. It certainly wasn't the end of the series, but it did mark the end of an era. Following the blockbuster success of Resident Evil 1 and 2, there was naturally a lot of demand from Capcom and Sony for another sequel. Capcom was ready to graduate from Sony to Sega, but Sony essentially bullied Capcom into making another Resident Evil sequel exclusively for the PlayStation. In Resident Evil 3, players control Jill Valentine, the female protagonist from Resident Evil 1. After the events of the first game, Jill decides to retire from the Raccoon City Police Department. Unfortunately for her, this could not have come at a worse time, because there is a zombie outbreak in Raccoon City. Because the zombie outbreak has gotten so far out of control, the US government decides to destroy Raccoon City with a nuclear missile. Jill must fight her way through hordes of monsters and escape Raccoon City before its destruction. Raising the stakes even further, throughout the game, Jill is pursued by a creature called Nemesis. Nemesis is a zombie, cyborg, revenant monstrosity that is programmed to attack Jill randomly throughout the game. Boss fights with crazy scary monsters have been a consistent hallmark of the series since Resident Evil 1. Resident Evil 3 forgoes many of these boss encounters to make way for the Nemesis encounters, which, as I mentioned, happen randomly throughout the game aside from a few key set pieces. Even to veteran Resident Evil players, Resident Evil 3 is a pretty rough game. There are more enemies in this game than Resident Evil 1 and 2 combined. And of course, the Nemesis encounters are a consistent X factor throughout the game. To compensate for this, there are more weapons and moves than ever before. But still, the game remains quite difficult. There are two difficulty settings. I recommend newcomers to the series to try the game on easy mode. Easy mode is very generous. Jill starts off easy mode with an assault rifle. Jill is also given access to many weapons very early in the game, whereas on the normal difficulty, you have to find them all throughout Raccoon City. Resident Evil Code Veronica will be the sequel to this game, and would play in a very similar style. Code Veronica would truly mark the end of the classic era of Resident Evil games. Afterwards, the Resident Evil series would more or less become third-person shooters. Resident Evil 4 is a pretty solid game. I've played it many times, and the engine was used as the basis to God Hand, which I think is freaking awesome. But it doesn't really feel very much like Resident Evil. 5 is even further removed from the horror concept and more or less a straight-up action game with scary monsters in it. What little I played of Resident Evil 6 was so bad that I actually forgot the game existed until I started working on this video. I selected Resident Evil 3 for our special Halloween review, because I strongly believe that Resident Evil 3 pushes the survival horror genre to its absolute limits, and raises the stakes higher than it's ever been in the entire Resident Evil series. This game continues the established ideas of the Resident Evil franchise, and adds one unique twist that makes for a truly frightening experience. If you're a PlayStation owner looking for a scare, I highly recommend you give this game a shot.